The veneering technique. We have some boxes here that some of your members made. This one here is just gorgeous. This is Jim Clancy's box, and this is covered with some kind of a burl. And then we have Bob Urso's box here, and Charlie James. And the lid is sort of a press-fit, tapered thing. But the method that they used was with the yellow glue, an iron-on method. A friend of mine introduced me to it many years ago. I went to his shop, and he was doing a fairly wide tabletop, and it was a book-matched tabletop. And one day I went there, and he was sort of laying the veneer up, hadn't put it down. And the next day I come back, and this thing is down, and it's down solid and flat and smooth. And I thought, what method did he use? What press? How had he laid this veneer up? And he said, well, I used yellow glue and an iron. And I couldn't believe it. So I asked him to demonstrate it, and he did, and I was completely knocked out. Several years earlier, I had seen a technique similar to that in fine woodworking, where the woodworker had applied the yellow glue onto the veneer, and then while the glue was still wet, placed it on the substrate and applied heat with the iron. But what happened is, in order to dry the glue and affect the bond, the water had to pass through that veneer. And in the meantime, the veneer was kind of sliding around. Well, this fellow's technique was a little bit different. He applied a very thin coat of yellow glue to both the substrate and the veneer, allowed them to dry, allowed most of the moisture to evaporate, and then simply placed one against the other. And with the heat from a common household iron, he was able to achieve a bond. And it was quite amazing. And I thought, boy, this is terrific, because at that time I was teaching a course in veneering utilizing traditional techniques with the hot glue. And one of the big problems with teaching traditional veneering is that people are very intimidated. They're not used to working with the hot glue. They don't know how much water to add. They don't know what type of glue to use. They don't know how to apply that glue. So there's so many questions. And as a result, they often steer clear of veneering. They don't even attempt it. It's the kind of thing that it adds tremendous range to the types of projects that you do. But if you're afraid to try it, you never really experience that sort of satisfaction. And as a result, you're really missing one of the great opportunities, one of the great satisfactions in woodworking. So I thought, well, this would be a good way to tempt people to try veneering out. I asked him if he would be interested in writing an article, and he declined. And he said, no, you go ahead and write the article. And I did, but I gave him credit. I mentioned in the article that I had been in his shop, and he had actually shown me this method. And it's pretty simple. The problem with paperback veneer is that, one, the veneer is very thin. And often what happens is, when you lay that stuff down, you're using contact cement. And when you go to sand it, the veneer is so thin, and the mill marks that run across the grain are so pronounced that usually, particularly at the corners, you cut through the veneer, revealing the paper beneath. So although it's much easier to use than solid regular veneer, I don't think it holds up as well. And in the end, it's not something I recommend using at all. Yeah, so this will work. This will work very well on regular 1/28" veneer. The longer you let it dry, the more of the moisture the water that's contained in the glue will evaporate. The less trouble you'll have with shrinkage and so on. The manufacturers claim that you've got about an 8-hour window. In other words, you can apply the glue and come back 8 hours later, put the veneer to the substrate, and achieve a good bond. But actually, it's a little bit longer. You could do it in the evening, come back the next morning, and even wait 24 hours, and it'll still work. So the longer you wait, the better off you're going to be. When I pitched this to the magazine, well, they decided they were going to put it on the cover, and then they decided they were going to make one of these little video clips. When they came to shoot the video, I was sort of going through all the various tools, and you have the veneer hammer and this and this and this, and I said, oh, I'm forgetting the most important tool. So I move off camera, and then the next shot opens up on my kitchen, and in the kitchen is the ironing board and the iron. And my babysitter lent her voice, and she's supposed to be acting as my wife, and I sort of sneak in to the kitchen, and I unplug the iron, and as I'm leaving, she says, Mario, is that you? I hope you're not taking my iron again. And I, go off camera, come back into the shop and say, well, here it is, the most important piece of equipment. And I thought, people at Taunton have no sense of humor. They're going to edit this out. Well, if anybody here has that tape, you'll see that it's still in there. And what happened was that as soon as the word got out at the magazine that we had tried this method and it worked, all these editors went straight home, got the old lady's iron, went there, screwed up the bottom, with glue and crud, So I think when we finished the tape, they decided let's leave it in. It's the way it actually happened. The flat part of the iron is easy enough to use on convex. So when you get into the hollows,
what is that, like copper pipe?
Yeah, just a scrap piece of copper with holes drilled, and then I punch some screws into the...
One assumes you didn't drill.
No. This is my iron. As Bob said, this technique works very well for small jobs. If you're doing like tapered legs for a card table or something like that, you can get it done in a couple of hours as opposed to doing one side in a press or some more elaborate and tedious method and then turning it around and getting the same amount of work done over the course of 3 or 4 days. So it's really nice for small projects. If you're doing large surfaces, I generally will thin it out, but this is straight out of the bottle. And I like to use these little rollers here, and these wash out pretty well. So you can use these about 10 times before they harden so much that they leave some imprint or pose some other problem.
So solid roller?
Solid roller, yeah, very short nap. You can even use a foam rubber roller.
Mario, just a quick thing on the foam roll. It seems to work a little better, but sometimes the mat comes off and stays on the material, and it will come through the veneer.
What happens is that there's so much water contained in the yellow glue that when you apply it to one side, it will curl. It will curl away from that glued side because what's happening is that water is causing the veneer to expand, and it will curl. What you have to do is spray water on the backside, so that way you're equalizing what's going on, and that will minimize or control somewhat. Sometimes what I'll do once I've glued it and wet it, is I'll lay a wooden straight edge or something right across it, and that will sort of tame it. Once it dries, it's in pretty good shape. You can probably manage anything, let's say, under 6 inches without a lot of fuss and bother. You slap the glue on, you let it dry, you put it on the wood, and apply the heat, and you'll be in pretty good shape. But you have to consider what you're doing. You're taking veneer that has achieved some sort of equilibrium, it's whatever ambient conditions exist, and then you're applying water on one side and glue on the other. So it is artificially swollen or expanded. And then you're allowing it to dry, so it shrinks down a tiny bit. Then you're applying it on the substrate, and you're applying heat directly onto it. And what that will do is cause it to shrink. So it's been expanded artificially, temporarily, and then when that heat takes hold, sometimes what happens, particularly on wide pieces, 12 inches or wider, is that just about the time that you've achieved the bond the movement of the veneer is inhibited somewhat, cracks start to form. All right, so that's too much heat applied directly. You have to keep the heat setting as low as possible and keep that iron moving. Also, when you select the veneer, you should hold it up to the light, and any false or any light that's coming through, you should probably put some sort of veneer tape on right over it. and that will control some of the shrinking that might occur. The thing is that this thing goes down so easily that it's very tempting to rip the tape off. And when you do, you'll notice, wow, look at that. It's flat, no blisters, no problems, the seam is tight, and you go home that night thinking you're on top of the world. You come in the next morning, and the veneer has dried further, and then right at the seam, right where that book match occurs, you get about a 1/16 of an inch gap. So I think some of the movement might occur after a period of time. Some of the problems I've encountered are folks that try it on a very small panel, and it works beautifully. Well, what they do is they go to the shop and they throw out the vacuum press. They figure, that's it, all I got to do is buy a better iron. It's just another technique to add to the arsenal. It's just one more thing that you can employ in different ways, maybe at different stages. It works really, really well, but it does have its limitations, and you have to sort of tweak it. I've found that pre-ironing the veneer before you're applying anything will artificially shrink it. It will, the heat applied to both sides, you're flipping it so that way it doesn't take a curl, will artificially shrink it. Then, when you apply the water and the glue, you take it back up to where it is right now. And that dramatically limits or controls the amount of cracking that will occur. I've done pieces with excellent results as wide as 20 inches. So it definitely works. But I got to tell you, I've worked my way up to 20 inches. I would recommend starting with very narrow, very small pieces. But it works. It works on curves and it sticks. I've also used it on coopered doors for bathroom vanities, and all that moisture and stuff. And these things do not delaminate.
Join them ahead of time.
Join them ahead of time, tape them together, and then lay them down as one solid sheet. This method, it tends to work better for that, but you can do it the other way. Interior. It doesn't make any. I've done it with white glue. I've done it with old white glue. I've done it with old Danish white glue. It works. Well, I've used yellow glue to put down veneer for years, but I've always relied on cauls and other reverse forms to hold it in place. I've always gotten great results, not ever a problem. But this was new. This was a way to eliminate presses and things. But, like I said, it has its limitations. It's also worked very well for doing edging and then running the grain across the edge. And it's, again, I just stress that it shouldn't be the one method that you use to replace every other, but one that you'll just add. All right, this is still a little bit wet, but maybe I'll deal with the seams and stuff now.
What's the thickness of this veneer?
This is 1/28. Yeah, it's just the regular standard stuff. Oh, okay. Now the saw I'm using is not off the rack or anything. It's a familiar shape, but I've cranked the neck down a little bit. I heated it up with a propane torch to soften it, and then just bent it with a pair of channel locks. But it's got a longer handle on it, and I've sharpened the teeth and beveled them. So I get a pretty good seam off the saw. What I like to use to hold the veneer are these push pins. Now these are a little bit different. These are metal ones, and they sell the metal ones with longer length pins. I'll show you some of the plastic ones. So here's another metal one that's short. See, so it's about 35%, 30% longer. We'll let Gabe sharpen it. You want to place the pins as close to the seam as possible, and at the same time give yourself enough space to get the tape in there.